I'm Danny Pletka. I'm Vice President for Foreign and Defense Policy Studies here at the American Enterprise Institute. I'm delighted to welcome two guests, two people who I think are perfect for the discussion that we have before us today about Operation Protective Edge and about the conflict between the Israelis and the Palestinians to a more limited extent, and Hamas to a larger extent, going from my right to left, Elliot Abrams, who is a senior fellow on the Middle East at the Council on Foreign Relations, former Deputy National Security Advisor in the Bush administration, and Reth Al-Omari. This, I think, is your first time here at a...
Yes, my first time.
Good. Well, make sure that he wants to come back, please, everybody. He is the Executive Director of the American Task Force for Palestine. He's a former advisor to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, served in several different capacities in the Palestinian Authority. What we're going to do today, guys, is just have a conversation. Nobody's going to give long presentations, so if you were planning on writing whatever college essay or newspaper article you hadn't written last week, now is not the time. We're just going to have a conversation about what's happening, and then we'll move to Q&A from the audience towards the end. I want to make sure we leave enough time. First, I want to turn to both of you and just talk a little bit about the state of play right now. I saw, excuse me, just before I came in, that Hamas has formally rejected the truce offer that the Egyptians made, and that the Israelis in turn said that this gives them carte blanche to do whatever is necessary. Where do you see things ending? Perhaps I'll let you start, and then Reth, if you would jump in.
Well, thanks. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me. It seems to me that Israel will now do some things on the ground in addition to continuing the air attacks. They have 40,000 soldiers sitting there. It's a reserve army, so these are civilians now who were called up. They can't sit there for a month because of the impact on the economy, on people's lives. So the decision has to be made pretty quickly whether to use them. If we assume now, with this formal rejection on the part of Hamas, that it's not going to be possible to put a ceasefire together fast, like today, then I think you'll begin to see at least some commando raids. I don't think Israel wants, I think it's very clear that the Prime Minister does not want to do a huge invasion of Gaza, does not want to reconquer Gaza and run it.
Notwithstanding what his foreign minister suggested.
Right. Netanyahu has been, I think, clear in showing that he doesn't want to do that, and I think most Israelis don't want to do it, and I think personally they'd be crazy to do it. But I do think you will now see some efforts to go further on the ground with the goal of getting at some of the missile arsenals and missile and launcher warehouses, arsenals, and going after some of the Hamas leadership.
Reth, where do you see things headed? And what's your insight also into why Hamas may have chosen to reject this?
I mean, first, actually, before I start, I want to give a shout out to the students here from the School of Ethical Global Leadership. Oh. Amazing bunch of young men and women. Look, what we are seeing right now, yes, the ceasefire by Egypt is rejected, but we're entering the phase of really now negotiating a ceasefire. This was the opening bid, it was rejected. Everyone's now going to try to tweak it in a way that they will get the best terms for themselves. From Hamas's point of view, I believe they rejected it for three reasons. One, they simply did not get enough in it. What the ceasefire calls is simply an end of hostilities. Hamas has been playing up its new attacks and new qualitative advantages, whatever, and they cannot accept going back with a ceasefire that gives them nothing. Secondly, the way it was done, Hamas was marginally consulted in its formulation. The way it was rolled out, basically, it was announced in the media before it was given to Hamas, and it was intentional from Egypt. Some commentators are saying it was hastily done. No, it was not hastily done. It was intentional from Egypt to basically further marginalize Hamas and to say to Hamas, you are not the main address in Gaza. So they consulted with them and with Islamic Jihad and with, PFLP with its 7 people and all of these things. So it was intentional, and Hamas would not accept that. And thirdly, and I think we go to the regional politics here, Hamas is not interested also in giving all of the credit to Egypt. Many Hamas spokespeople are saying, we want a ceasefire that's mediated by many players. Mish'al, the political leader of Hamas, is now in in Ankara, in Turkey. Sheikh Tamim of Qatar is either on his way or is already in Turkey. So they want, that axis wants to be back in the game at a time where, frankly, Qatar and Turkey have lost all of their assets with the loss of Morsi in Egypt, with in Libya, in Syria, elsewhere. So they are looking also for an end in this case. So I think what we will see right now, as in the next few days, Hamas will try to step up its attacks to claim some kind of victory, to kind of leverage it in the ceasefire. And they will try to also, wait for the Arab street, which so far has not really been active, to start exerting pressure on their leaders. And finally, they will try to wait and allow Turkey and Qatar to position in a way that will give them more of an interest and more of a stake and more of a credit in any ceasefire that would come in the end.
I want to talk about regional dynamics because I think it sort of rips the lid off something that's been developing that we have paid attention to, but not from this perspective in a while. But sticking right now with just this particular conflict, you mentioned Hamas, you mentioned PEJ, you mentioned the PFLP and their meetings in a phone booth. There are a couple other groups as well. You didn't mention the Palestinian Authority. What does this mean for them?
Keep in mind that the Palestinian Authority entered, or as the hostilities started, the Palestinian Authority was already in a politically weakened position. This comes after the kidnap and murder of the 3 Israeli teenagers, followed by the kidnap and murder of the Palestinian teenager in Jerusalem. And the PA at that time paid a heavy political price for continuing the security coordination with Israel, for Abu Mazen to standing up and basically saying, condemning the killings of the Israeli teenagers. By the way, a condemnation that was not positively responded to by Netanyahu for a while, etc. So they were already weakened. And in the beginning, they were really confused. What we saw in the first few days is the PA was not present in any ways. The PA has become, though, a bit more active in the last couple of days. Abbas is going to Cairo. We are hearing now of a Palestinian ceasefire proposal that will include reopening the Rafah crossing with PA troops manning it. We're seeing a stepping up, but by far, it seems to me that the PA, as we stand today, if we take a snapshot of today, is probably in political terms so far the biggest losers. This can change if we end up with a ceasefire that will give them something, either to allow them to say, we were instrumental in reaching the ceasefire, and or to say that the terms of the ceasefire will give the PA further access to Gaza.
I want to come back to Palestinian politics in a second, but first, Elliot, I want to turn to you for a moment. What do we see, as the Israeli perspective on this? No matter what happens and how this ends, and I think we all have a sense that it is going to wind down at some point, maybe with some limited ground operations. How does this leave the status quo between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and between the Israelis and Hamas in particular?
It doesn't fundamentally change the relationship between Israel and Hamas. There is Hamas, they're ruling Gaza. They're going to be ruling Gaza when this ends. And the balance of forces has, in a sense, changed. It's changed its nature, but we find now the ability of Hamas to do great damage in Israel has been limited a great deal. On the other hand, the ability of Hamas to fabricate its own rockets is greater than I think most Israelis realize. Their ability to launch, it's about 1,000 rockets now, well into Israel, not Katyushas that go to Sderot, but way up, past Tel Aviv, was something I think most Israelis didn't quite realize. So what the Israelis want now with Hamas is to go back essentially to the status quo ante, which is we don't hit you, you don't hit us. And the past has been a pattern where there's a fight for 2 weeks, peace for 2 years, fight for 2 weeks, peace for 2 years. My guess is that that will not change because the fundamental issue of having a let's call it Hamastan in Gaza, probably won't change. Now, Rafe mentions, and I think it's potentially important if it happened, what if the PA gets back in Gaza? It's possible, it's conceivable, let's put it that way, because the deal between Hamas and Fatah was a deal that theoretically brought the PA back. Of course, it theoretically brought Hamas a little bit to the West Bank, but theoretically brought the PA back. A conclusion to this war may put the PA at least in the passages between Gaza and Israel and Gaza and Egypt. But fundamentally, this fighting does not address the bottom, let's say the fundamental issue. Well, the fundamental issue is you have a terrorist group in control of Gaza. The only thing the Israelis are trying to do with respect to Gaza now is stop the rockets. There are alternative theories. Giora Eiland, a former national security advisor of Israel, has advanced the theory that Israel should view Gaza as essentially a country. That is, don't try to link the PA and the West Bank to Gaza. Treat it as an independent place. Cut as soon as you're able. Cut those border links, cut the supply of electricity and food, and work out with Egypt and with the EU a way of getting things like food and energy into Gaza, which then becomes, in a sense, for Israelis, a separate country, so the three-state solution, if you will. And if that country makes war on Israel, then Israel responds. Ireland has put that out a number of times, including in the middle of this war. Most Israelis, however, seem still to be, and the government of Israel still seems to be pushing toward status quo ante. Just stop the rockets, we'll stop hitting Gaza, things will be quiet.
I want to understand. I'm truly confused about some of the motivations here. The National Unity Government, or whatever they called it, the unity government that was agreed to before this conflict broke out between Fatah and Hamas, and that was provisionally accepted with rather more enthusiasm than I think many of us expected from the Obama administration, seems a non-starter now, at least from the standpoint of the outside world. Yes, Hamas has done a lot to elevate its temporary political popularity. It reminds me a little bit of Hassan Nasrallah and the decision-making that went into the last conflict with Israel from Hezbollah when he had to apologize afterwards, because when push came to shove, after the euphoria of everybody bombing everybody else passed, there really wasn't a lot to show for it except a lot of bombing. Was this a good strategic move on Hamas's part, in your estimation?
Before I answer this, if I may just kind of follow up on a point that you mentioned, which is Giora Eiland's idea of cutting off Gaza and basically making it an Egyptian problem. This is the Egyptians' worst kind of conspiracy theory nightmare. This is what they are all against. And this is a time, what's very interesting in this conflict, one of the interesting elements is Israel, I think, is treating this as an opportunity to strengthen the relations with the new Egyptian regime. And we've seen cooperation and coordination that is actually very intense. And any ideas of this sort, if they gain any traction, especially from some of the loose cannons in the Israeli government, would really deal a major blow to this budding relation. So this is a sensitive time in that level. In terms of Hamas, I think they overreached. I think they miscalculated. I think that they believed that some of their, new qualitative attacks, the drones and the amphibious is that the word, attacks that they did, they thought they would create more damage. And suddenly they find themselves with nothing to show. They're trying to construct, if you look at their media, they're trying to construct a narrative of victory, but so far it's really thin and it's really shaky. And that's one of the reasons why they said no to the Egyptian proposal. And they are hoping that either if they manage to inflict some serious damage on Israel, or frankly, as the civilian casualties, and we have not talked about this really, the civilian casualties and the infrastructure and what have you, as it mounts, and with the international sympathy moving in that direction, and the focus moving on the humanitarian side, and as it should in many ways, that they will end up getting deals, terms of the ceasefire deal that will allow them to avoid what happened to Nasrallah, and to say that, yes, we paid, yes, people died, but ultimately, these are the deliverables that we got out of it. This is, I think, the game they're playing.
I think this is right, but it's going to be very hard for them. I mean, what do they want? They want the Israelis to release some of the terrorists who had been released in exchange for Gilad Shalit and have now been rearrested. They want them out. No Israeli government, I think, can do that right now. So what do they want? Secondarily, money and the opening of the passages. So money, this depends on Qatar. That's probably doable to pay civil servant salaries. The passages, woof.
But that's the big
On
one.
the other side of it, it is a big one.
That's the big one.
And here's my prediction. This deal will be done, whether it's done tomorrow or a week from tomorrow, and Egypt will promise to open the passages, and they will open the passages, and they will keep them open for days. This is a hostile government in Cairo, right? They hate these guys. This is the Muslim Brotherhood. They hate them. They want them weakened. So they will open the passages in order to get this deal done. And the world's attention with what's going on in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere will turn. And over a period of, 3 months, 9 months, slowly but surely you will see those passages start to close up again, because when Hamas protests, no one will care.
And that's why I think that's what I said. They miscalculated because I think they did not understand where the Arab street is right now, what are the priorities, and the relative leverage of their supporters versus their opponents. The problem with all of this, frankly, and I'm going back to Palestinian politics here, is it's not clear to me how well positioned the PA is to politically take advantage of that. And this is where there is a great need for the PA to be seen as more proactive and more capable.
And yet, where are they? I mean, it seems to me a natural statement for Abu Mazen to make, to stand up and say, yes, we can all agree the Israelis are an evil enemy that are targeting civilians, et cetera, et cetera. On the other hand, the notion that we should that our fellow Palestinians are choosing to sacrifice more civilians in order to extract a better deal is not acceptable to me.
To his credit, he did, in the very beginning, he did criticize the missiles, calling them nihilistic. I think that's the best abathiyya in Arabic. But the problem is not there. The problem is that he is not seen as being sufficiently proactive to actually mobilize the Arab world. He's not camped in Egypt from day one. He has not done, the obligatory visit to Riyadh, Amman.
Why?
I think part of it is he sees his options are limited. Part of it he is cornered, where frankly right now there's a lot of pressure on him to kind of use to go to the UN as a way of responding to this, but he understands that if he does that, it puts him on a head-on trajectory with the United States.
Right.
So his options are quite limited, and I think in many ways it's not in his nature to be very proactive and energetic. And he is paying a price for it.
And that's the heart of the problem. But I mean, he is in his sort of twilight of the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, and again, what we look at, it seems to me to be in part a bidding war for the next generation. Theoretically, of course, Hamas has dealt itself out of the game, except for the fact that Abu Mazen isn't in Riyadh and isn't in Cairo and isn't anywhere else. And no one else is either.
This point about the next generation, I think, is important. One of the reasons I believe Hamas did this is, in the last couple of years, since the last round with Israel, Hamas has been maintaining a kind of ceasefire, which means that not only is it not shooting rockets into Israel, it's policing the borders, it's preventing PFLP, Islamic Jihad, and so forth from doing it. Opening them to the accusation, which is often made against the PA, you are Israel's policeman. If you've got all these, 17, 18-year-old young men who want to engage in the struggle, they don't want to be policemen for Israel. And Hamas runs the risk that they begin to walk away to join these other groups which are resisting, to use their term. it's one of the problems I think Hamas faces, and it leads them every once in a while to say, okay, we need some war, we need some violence here, just to keep up people's spirits. I think the other big factor for them was money. Since the Egyptians closed those tunnels, or most of them, the fiscal situation for Hamas has been very tough. And that's why they're insisting as a war aim on getting somebody to pay the salary bill.
I think, by the way, it's one of maybe not the kind of direct causal outcomes of this, but I think one of the dynamics that we will see after this the dust settles is we will see entities in transition. I can't speak much about Israel, but I see interesting developments there. Netanyahu firing Danny Danon. You mentioned Lieberman. Netanyahu's press conference or speech yesterday was a very thinly veiled criticism of Lieberman's calls for occupying Gaza. So interesting things are happening in Israel, but in the PA, or among the Palestinians, you mentioned the Hamas dynamic, the tension between the younger and the older, and actually this is a question that is as of yet unanswered, is who was really behind this escalation? Because at the beginning, some of the older Hamas generation, Mishal and others, were actually, the rhetoric was more de-escalatory. There's a sense that the military wing actually is taking control. So what we're seeing actually right now, we're seeing a unity in Hamas that is natural when you're under fire, but there's bubbling under the surface tensions. And I think after this, we'll see a continuation and intensification of the power struggles within Hamas. And within the PA, or Fatah at least, we're also seeing a problem. One of the things that we saw at the lead up to the operation and in the continuation of the operation is many within Fatah itself are challenging Abbas. I mean, the obvious, Dahlan and some of the others, but some of the people who you would always thought were part of the Abbas camp are seeing basically the succession dynamic opening up. And with that, when you have transitions, the ability to make strategic big decisions becomes extremely limited. And actually this kind of begs the question from our perspective in the United States, what do we do next? Do we go back to trying to go big and strategic when you have politics on the ground that does not allow for that? Or do we go for more of, a more realistic approach to how do we manage the issue?
So this is a nice segue for us to talk not only about the regional dynamics, but also about American interests. I've said this more than once, and I'm going to repeat it now. I'd love to hear your impressions, and I know we've talked about this before. One of my feelings is that by pushing this peace process, when Kerry came into office, without being willing to do a lot of the preparatory work, and without being mindful of the dynamics on the ground, we actually weakened the PA even further than was necessary. And then so that the question becomes, does Kerry now circle back and try to do like the big thing, the strategic thing, if you want to call it that? I would actually say it wasn't that strategic. It just felt strategic to him. It was interesting that he didn't go to the region after being in Vienna meeting with the Iranians, and it seemed very clear that everybody said, yeah, no, right, thanks a lot, we'll call you if we need you. But how is the United States position? Maybe I'll let you take this and then Henri.
I can't help reminding everybody of Jim Baker once, as Secretary of State, in a moment of anger, said to the Israelis and Palestinians, you have our phone number, call us. And now that's reversed. So they did, I think,
a demeaning moment
say,
for
do not,
perhaps.
do not, said to the Secretary, do not come now. Look, I think, I certainly hope he learned his lesson from his first, year and a half as Secretary of State. The conditions on the ground were not such as to permit a comprehensive peace agreement. And so he failed. And none of his advisors, as far as I'm aware, thought that the conditions existed for a comprehensive peace agreement. This was Kerry's, frankly, vanity that he could do it. I hope he's learned something, because my own view is that in the aftermath of this war, which will, as you said, it will end in a few days, what's changed that would make a comprehensive peace agreement possible? In my view, nothing fundamental. Ask the sort of obvious question, have Palestinians and Israelis now changed their position on Jerusalem such that they will be able to, no, of course not. So What I would hope is that Kerry and the administration would think much more pragmatically. Okay, this war has ended. We see certain damage to the PA. We see certain damage to Hamas. We see the balance of forces in the region. Is there anything positive to do? Small things. Is there anything positive to improve the economy of the West Bank? Increase the amount of self-government, of autonomy in the West Bank, for example, to improve the position of the PA in Gaza, that is, begin to get them back into Gaza. None of this is dramatic. It's not front-page news. It doesn't get anybody Nobel Peace Prizes, but it's a lot more sensible. Kerry's got basically a couple of years to go. He might achieve something, I think, if the goals were that kind of pragmatic level. If he goes for the comprehensive peace agreement again, first of all, I think the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis will let out such a loud groan that we'll be able to hear it very easily in Washington.
No, maybe let's start with the specific and then go a bit. I mean, I actually think it is right that the secretary did not go to Cairo, because it was very clear that the ceasefire attempt was not ripe, things were not ripe, and frankly, the last thing we want in this country is to be engaged in another initiative in the region that will fail. We don't need that. It's not good for you standing at a time where things are really shaky elsewhere. Look, I mean, in larger terms, first of all, Secretary Kerry's efforts, irrespective of what the outcome, I think are laudable, and his commitment is laudable. Yet, of course, failure comes with a price, and we are now seeing the price. I think, and here I would agree in what you said and maybe elaborate a little bit, is I think one of the biggest casualties of the negotiation process that we saw was the governance and institution building program and the project that the Palestinians under Prime Minister Fayyad were engaged in. This took a second place, and we have seen a reversal and an erosion of some of the reforms that were put under place, to the great detriment of the PA at the end of the day. When the negotiations failed, the PA had nothing to fall back onto, had nothing to commend itself to its public. And I think one of the lessons learned is this is something, in addition to economy, in addition to all of these things, the issue of Palestinian governance, good governance, lack of corruption, transparency, are things that we have to focus on, not only because they are right, and they are right, but also because for pragmatic political reasons, they will give you a reservoir of political credit that you can always use. Secondly, and here I will again second what you said, I mentioned the security cooperation that was happening during the kidnapping and the killing of the Israeli teenagers, and the political price that the PA had to pay for that. I think that solid security cooperation creates a foundation for some of the things that you hinted at, developments on the ground, extension of Palestinian jurisdiction, to allow the Palestinian, Abbas and others who are invested in this, to say to their public that we're not only doing this as a way of doing the Israelis' dirty work, but rather this is giving us political dividend, allowing us to expand our territory, and ultimately is a step towards the occupation. I think these are the kind of things that are needed right now to rebuild some of and frankly, for that kind of thing, you have a constituency in Israel, particularly in the IDF and in the military intelligence and intelligence communities.
Let's talk a little bit about the region now. I mean, Egypt has been interesting, but probably reasonably predictable. Sisi hates the Muslim Brotherhood with a single-mindedness that we haven't seen in quite a long time. He's ruthless in a way that Mubarak, frankly, was not, at least not in his latter years, and that extends to not just to Hamas, but to Hamas's godfathers in the region, to Qatar, to Turkey, and it is absolutely fascinating to see how this shakes out, because of course the way this ranges countries in the region is we have Qatar and Turkey standing for Hamas, with Iran, basically the Sunni and the Shia extremists of the region standing together against, I don't want to characterize Sisi as a moderate, because I don't think he is one. But what does this mean, and how does it shake out? How do you see it?
Well, maybe And it's impossible to see, first of all, how it's shake out, because there are many other factors. What you did not mention, for example, is the nuclear talks that are happening
Right.
with Iran. I mean, that shapes
Right
a lot in terms of the perception of the U.S. traditional allies in the region, the Gulf, Saudi, others. But look, I mean, to me, it indicates many things. First of all, it indicates that the issue of Palestine, even though it went down the immediate priority list, it is still an emotive issue that transcends the Sunni-Shia divide. It's a good card for everyone to try to grab.
That's very silver lining of you.
That's how I see it. Secondly, I would say, look, I mean, this is tactical. Ultimately, the conflict, the deeper conflict in the region, in terms of the power and primacy, is still playing out, and it is many things. It's Sunni Shia, but it's not only that. It's Arab, Turkish, Persian. It is about Gulf security, not about only about. So it's all of these things are at play. I don't think this is going to be, the determining one. I think for some of the pro-Muslim Brotherhood countries, though, again, Turkey here comes in very clearly, and Qatar as well. It is a way to an attempt to reassert relevance. I think Erdogan was trying at the beginning of the Arab Spring to show himself as the leader of the Sunni world, which was very, unceremoniously rejected even by Muslim Brotherhood players in Egypt and otherwise. He's starting to trying to reassert that through propping up Hamas, and this is a line that he has been using for years. And Qatar, a small country that cannot have a multifaceted foreign policy, ends up investing most of its political capital on this project of Muslim Brotherhood. Overnight, literally overnight, they end up with nothing. This is their way to come back into relevance. And I think this is something to keep in mind as one looks at the not only the terms of the ceasefire, but also the optics and the formulation process of the ceasefire. How much do we give them in that, and how much credit do we allow them to say we still are very relevant and important players in this context?
I want to let you comment, and then I want to come back to this question of the Palestinian cause among the Arabs, and because you mentioned the Arab Street at the outset.
I actually wanted to make a comment on that. It's very striking. Think for a minute of the massive demonstrations in the last week while this war has been taking place in Cairo, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, Istanbul, Beirut. Nothing.
Right.
There aren't any. There have been what I wouldn't call demonstrations. I'd call them acts of anti-Semitic gangs in Western Europe. But that's not so much pro-Palestinian as it is simply anti-Semitic gangs. The Arab world's been remarkably quiet. In the summer of 2001, the King of Saudi Arabia said to the new American president, George W. Bush, that Saudi-American relations would have to be completely changed, that the relationship of decades would be broken because we were not restraining the Israelis. There's been no similar phone call to or message to President Obama, at least I think any of us are aware of. So the lack of solidarity with Hamas, I think, in Western European governments, so far anyway, the lack of real efforts to get Israel to stop, we just haven't seen anything like that, nor have we seen the, quotes, Arab Street respond much. Now, if there were a massive ground invasion and there were thousands of casualties in 2 days, that would presumably change. But I'm very struck by the degree to which, I mean, you mentioned that they're now relying on Turkey and Qatar. That's it. It's really all they've got. I mean, they have isolated themselves sufficiently now so that there's a lot of indifference, and certainly in Egypt and some other places, maybe Saudi Arabia, the Emirates.
Downright hostility.
Yeah, and not particularly sorry to see them getting their comeuppance.
But this is, I mean, if I may, this is
please.
true of Hamas. And it is very much part of the anti-Muslim Brotherhood wave that we are seeing, and the strategic, and here I'll use strategic, recession of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology and brand of is political Islam. That's true. And it's also very true for the fact that Hamas had very explicitly, since the removal of Morsi, has been out there against Sisi. I mean, the Rab'a sign, the sign of solidarity, is one that you see in every Hamas rally. Now, that is absolutely true, and Hamas is paying the price for it right now. However, the point that I was making is, yes, this is not the issue that's taking people to the streets yet. This is not an issue that's top of the priority. Still, it's an emotive enough issue to be seen as an opportunity for players who have been marginalized so far to reinsert themselves in the conversation. And this is how it's being played, I think, by some of the players.
No, I think that's very interesting. But I mean, it again is interesting that it is sort of the marginal, the people who are looking for a foothold, the countries that are not the traditional stalwarts of the Arab League. And it really is fascinating when I watch, when I watch the coverage of the conflict on Twitter, for example. Lots and lots of the commentary is still through this sort of Muslim Brotherhood, anti-Muslim Brotherhood, Arab Spring, anti-Arab Spring prism, even among the Arabs. And while there's obviously a lot of sort of straight humanitarian coverage, it is absolutely striking to me that it has failed to ignite this chord. And there's another point here, and I want to segue to talk about Iran for a second, because you rightly mentioned that this is the backdrop for the United States. Of course, this is the big win. What is it's not peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, because clearly that's right a chasm into which many have fallen before, but possible agreement with Iran about its nuclear program. We've got foreign ministers gathering in Vienna this week. The talks went on between Zarif. We've got the deadline of next Sunday, and yet Hamas is another way of looking at the Iranian question. Hamas broke with Iran 3 years ago over Bashar al-Assad, and the Iranians were pretty tough with them. They cut them off, and they turned to our friends in Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Right? Oh, come, my sweeties, let us give you money and arms. And Hamas has since rethought its decision. But it is very interesting to watch the role that the Iranians are playing, because this is very dangerous for them as well. Not just for Hamas to be perceived once again as sort of a stooge for either the Muslim Brotherhood on one side or the Iranian regime on the other, but also for the Iranians. How does this shake out in terms of the regional game, in terms of implications for Syria?
Well, one comment. We tend in Washington to see the critical Iranian role here in the nuclear program and the critical date as July 20th. That is not the view that most Arabs take, particularly Gulf Arabs. They are more concerned with subversion, with political influence. So they are concerned greatly, of course, about Iraq. They are concerned about the Iranian role in Gaza. And one of the things that you hear from Gulf Arabs is, you guys think that the only that matters here is the nukes. Well, we are worried about a lot more. We are worried about subversion. We're worried about terrorism. We're worried about their support of. So there's a real difference in the position of most Arab countries viewing Shia, Persian Iran, and the United States, which seems to see this as a non-proliferation problem.
I think this point is very important that you made, Elliot, and I want to even emphasize it again. When the Saudis and other Gulf countries look at what's happening in Iraq, and look at the Iranian role in Iraq, they look very, and maybe in a paranoid way, at the Iranian role. And are the Americans blessing it? And is this part of the hidden price for the nuclear deal? And are the Americans selling our interest to the Iranians in terms of the regional security, Gulf security, hegemony, things of this sort? And these are the things that are really occupying right now many of our traditional allies. Palestine is just a small piece when it comes to this. Again, I think the big piece right now is Iraq and Syria, and in some ways the merging of the two. And this is where they're seeing some of these happening. In terms of specifically Gaza and Hamas, one of the, questions that I don't have an answer to, but would be relevant in answering your point is who is calling the shots? Because from the very beginning, when Hamas broke off with Iran over Syria, the military wing was not happy with that. Some of the political leaders who are affiliated with the military wing, like Mahmoud Zahar, were not very happy with this. Now, is this giving them primacy? Is this a time when suddenly the pro-Iranian elements in Hamas are becoming the ones who are calling the shots? I mean, literally, in this case. I think this is a question that is worth keeping an eye on, because that will very much form or determine to what extent Iran is again a player in the Palestinian context. By the way, the Islamic Jihad, even though they maintained their relation with Iran, they were smart. They were the ones also to try to open relations with Egypt. And Egypt actually did open relations with them as a way of basically showing Hamas that you're not the only guys out there. So the last mini ceasefire was done actually directly with Egypt and Islamic Jihad bypassing Hamas, sending Hamas into a frenzy. So it's a very so many moving pieces in this.
Let me just add one more.
Yeah.
I think the Israeli military has not wanted to go into Gaza on the ground because I guess their judgment is that the gains they would get would not equal the price they will pay, including in Israeli dead. But I have one fear about the decision not to go in on the ground, and that is the impact on Iran. If the Iranians conclude, you see, Netanyahu's a bluffer. Netanyahu's a guy who is actually, though his reputation is very tough and right-wing, is actually very prudent, then he's not going to attack us either. And of course, if that's the conclusion they reach, then it emboldens their search for nuclear weapons.
I would have thought that they already reached that conclusion. God knows I have. I'm going to open things up to questions. If I could ask everybody to be nice enough to adhere to our rules, identify yourself when I call on you, and keep your brilliant peroration in the form of a short question. I also want to flag for the two of you that, and at a lull in the questioning, I want to talk a little bit about the Palestinian people and the price that they're paying for all of this.
And that's a point I think that we need to focus on.
Right.
We're talking policy, but at the end of the day, it's people who are dying.
And it's not getting a lot of attention. So, gentlemen back here at the table.
Stuart Sloan. Two short questions. One is to follow up what was just mentioned by Elliot about the IDF's position on going into Gaza on the ground. The media reports seem to indicate that the Israeli public, seems to want that because they don't want just another 2 years of ceasefire. They want the job done once and for all. I don't know do you know whether that is an accurate assessment of Israeli public opinion, and what effect would that have on Netanyahu? The second question has to do with Russia. We haven't heard a peep from Putin about this, other than some support he gave for Israel right to defend itself in remarks to, I think it was the chief rabbi of Moscow. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Interesting. Gentlemen?
Well, on Russia, I think they're not a player. I mean, they're not really a player and haven't been. For UN reasons, they were a member of the quartet, so they had a sort of phony role for the last 10 years. But they're not, nor really could they play any real role. Look, on the public opinion thing, public opinion is fickle. And I think the Israeli politicians are too smart to, the polls will change from one day to the next, not only in Israel, but here and in any other country when it comes to war. Great idea to go in on the ground. 3 days later, with a lot of Israelis dead in Gaza, will it have been such a great idea? What will public opinion say then? So you're in the middle of this. The question, when the war in Lebanon began, strong support, 2006, for Olmert. It killed Olmert politically in the end. So I don't, I doubt that Netanyahu will let himself be guided by really quite transitory poll results.
If I may, just one addition. You said the Israeli politicians are wise. Well, not all of them. I mean, what we see right now is actually many voices on the right of Netanyahu, particularly from within his own party. I mean, Danny Danon being the most obvious, but that represents the trend that's actually trying to push for that. Now, I assume part of this is, frankly, just political. And it's really dangerous when strategic issues and people's lives become chips in a political game. Netanyahu, so far, seems to be very aware of what you said, but I see a disturbing trend, especially in Likud.
The irony here, of course, is that Netanyahu broke with Sharon over the withdrawal from Gaza, and now Netanyahu finds himself in almost exactly the same position. His problem's not the opposition, Labor, nor was it for Sharon. His problem is his own party, Likud.
Right. I mean, I will say this is one of the disadvantages of these sort of parliamentary systems, which is that in America you don't hear it because the president is the de facto dictator of his own administration, as it should be. But in any other parliamentary system, you do see the same sort of second guessing and kibitzing, whether it's it's just not always as exciting as it is in Israel, and nor is it as personal or loud-mouthed. But it does occur in a lot of other countries as well. Yes, sorry. Yes, sir. Gentleman at the table.
Joe Gildenhorn. Where does Fatah stand in the scheme of things? Do they support the rockets of Hamas going into Israel? Can they control Hamas, Fatah?
Fatah, that's the question. Look, you're hearing many voices from within Fatah. I mean, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, is very clear in his condemnation and his rejection of violence, always has been. You remember Elliot when he was prime minister and the price he paid for publicly speaking against violence. So I think in that he has been very consistent. But what you see in Fatah, though, is two interesting dynamics. One is the court politics, the succession politics. Those who are positioning and basically playing on the public anger by playing a more hardline position. Even people who you would not have expected to do that. Someone like Mohammed Dahlan, for example, who was always part of the security cooperation, has always been seen as someone pragmatic, came out yesterday calling for or supporting some of the Palestinians' right to defend themselves. So you have that one, the kind of court politics and the succession politics that I talked about that creates a paralysis and, again, maybe uncontrollable politics. But another one in Fatah itself is the young generation in Fatah. You mentioned the young generation in Hamas. There's those in Fatah who, frankly, right now are fed up with two things. They see that diplomacy is producing nothing, moderation is producing nothing, whether it is on the high politics of negotiations or on the smaller things. I mean, what was one of Salam Fayyad? He's not a Fatah guy, but his biggest vulnerability was he's engaged in political in security coordination, yet there's no political dividend. So you have people, the younger Fatah people, are saying, what are we doing with this moderation? That's one. Two, they are also quite frustrated with the lack of or the closing political space within Fatah itself and in the Palestinian Authority. And their support for some of this violence is partly a message to the PA and to Abbas saying, we will not be ignored. If you keep on closing the political space, we have other ways of expressing ourselves, and these are not ones that you might be very happy with.
Thank you. Vijay Nilekani. One question I had was if the nuclear talks with Iran fail, which I think more likely to fail because of their red lines, they're more credible, they're very serious about their red lines. What is the ramification on the policy, the dynamic between Iran, Hamas, Israel, and the US?
Hard question.
That's a hard question.
Well, I think maybe the word fail is probably the word that the United States and the P5+1 will seek to prevent you from using. They didn't fail, they're just extended. So they don't succeed. I think it looks now very unlikely that there'll be a deal by the 20th. So there'll be an extension. And the question will be, what are the terms of that extension? Presumably, they won't be very different from the current joint plan of action terms, the last 6 months. From the point of view of, I would say, most people in the region, that doesn't change the current dynamic. That is, rising Iran on its way to nuclear weapons. The joint plan of action does not prevent them from fooling around with trying to build a warhead, nor does it stop their missile work. So I think there will be some satisfaction in the region that there wasn't a bad deal, which is what I think most people feared most. But this won't be viewed as a great setback for Iran. If you think of Iran's role in Iraq, Iran's role in Syria, Iran's role perhaps in Palestine, Iran's role certainly in Lebanon. It doesn't diminish that role. It doesn't limit that role in any way.
I agree. Somebody else? This young man here.
Yeah, I know we've touched on.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Sorry, Elliot Miller. I know we just touched on the Iranian nuclear deadline on July 20th on Sunday. Just the impact on Israel's decision-making, especially Netanyahu's decision-making on whether to go in for ground invasion. Do you not think that with that deadline coming and, you know, with Netanyahu being quite public in the way he says he doesn't want a bad deal, the international community is starting out to a bad deal, that he's trying to stay on the good side of the Obama administration by not doing anything too sort of extreme?
I think the Israelis, every Israeli government will always try to stay on the good side of whoever is in power in the United States. On the other hand, you know, they're in the middle of a war here with Hamas. They're getting 100 rockets a day. And the administration is decreasingly popular in the United States. I think that's fair to say, judging from polls. And it's, you know, we're moving toward an election, the last off-year election for this administration, and one which may lose at the Senate, and then the president becomes the lame duck. And I think the Israelis, to some extent, frankly, have given up on this administration. That is, I mean, I think it's very striking what happened when this war began a week ago. Netanyahu talks to Hollande. Netanyahu talks to Harper. Netanyahu talks to Cameron. Netanyahu talks to Merkel, not the President of the United States. And I believe that's not because Netanyahu didn't want to, it's because Obama didn't want to. So that's a clear message to the Israelis. There's nothing you can really do that's going to get them, this team, to move much into your camp. So yes, the call finally took place 4 or 5 days into the war, and everybody goes around saying things are wonderful, and everybody knows they're not, and they're not going to be.
Gentleman at the table back there.
Hi, Gary Sargent, run a small company called TS Light. I'm a retired Army officer, spent some time in Beirut, so I'm going to reel back to Israeli ground force incursions. Do you think the IDF has actually learned something from '06 and are actually looking at the operational and tactical decision-making issues on doing an incursion? Because I don't think they've learned anything from that.
Yeah.
But
I don't know. You know, the history, Elliot Cohen has often said that the history of the IDF is not a history of one great victory after another. It's a history of near defeats from which they learn a lot. So maybe they have. And of course, they wouldn't talk all that much about it. I mean, the main change in this war is technological, Iron Dome. Are there any technological tricks that they've learned that would affect a ground war? To me, at least, unclear. So I really don't know. And I think it is clear, however, that there's no enormous appetite to do this on the part of the IDF. You do not see General Gantz pushing for this. You do see the head of the Air Force saying, leave it to me, which was, of course, a mistake they made in 2006 in Lebanon. So maybe that's a lesson not learned. But all we can say, I think, is that one lesson the IDF may have learned is that when you go in on the ground, you lose a lot of men and you kill a lot of people.
I think that, I don't think you're right, actually, about the lessons learned. I think the Israelis spend a lot more time on lessons learned, frankly, than we do. Well, that's also possible. That's also possible and a common problem. But I mean, I think that the Israelis can't help but look at the outcome of the 2006 war with Hezbollah and say that it ushered in a period of unprecedented quiet.
Yep, it's quite right. And you know, in the immediate aftermath of that war, the general view in Israel was this was a bad outcome. And that has changed over time because Hezbollah seems to have learned its lesson. So now, you know, if a ground operation produced, you won't know the day it's over. But if it produced 5 years without any rocketing, then Israelis would look back and say, well, that was worth doing.
So I'm going to cut off questioning for a moment because I don't think it's right that we end this without talking a little bit about the Palestinians. And this is a perfect segue into it. One of the things that's most striking about Hezbollah is its willingness to take the southern Lebanese population hostage, to dig this system of tunnels underneath in which it hides weaponry, to use schools and hospitals and mosques as arms caches, and increasingly we see Hamas embracing exactly the same tactics. I think that as a matter of political strategy for Hezbollah, this was a bad one. Now, obviously, there are not a lot of other choices for the Lebanese Shia population, but it's interesting to me that as we see Palestinian casualties rising, and this deliberate attempt to really victimize them, we have a problem.
I would say two things to this. First, keep in mind, I mean, there's a difference between Hezbollah and Hamas in a sense, in that Hezbollah tends to be much more sensitive to public opinion of its base. This is coming under pressure right now with their operations in Syria, but by and large, they were more sensitive to it. Hamas, keep in mind, when it entered this whole phase, Hamas's popularity in Gaza in particular was extremely low, and they did not really care that much because they were not governing because they were popular. They're governing because you disagree with them, they kneecap you. It's not that difficult. However, now that said, when you are under fire, when people are dying, when the images that you see are of destruction of infrastructure, I can't remember the number now, it's over 200. Yesterday I read in the morning 33 children were part of that. When you're under this situation, you don't stop and think, oh, well, it's Hamas's fault. No, it's this fault. You know this is an Israeli missile coming and hitting us. So no matter what, the rising humanitarian cost is one that by the Palestinian public is clearly seen as one that is that Israel is the one who is responsible for it, and equally in the Arab public opinion. For the time being, now in the future, as things progress, will there be a process of looking backwards and assessing? There might be the case. But right now, as casualties mount, it is very hard to imagine any Palestinian who would stand there and say it's Hamas's fault. Right now, the public perception is this is a war against the Palestinian people, and this is how it's being seen and treated by most Palestinians.
Let me just, without disagreeing with that, note, pardon me, you know, the callousness, the viciousness of Hamas is shown in a little paragraph in a Washington Post story yesterday, talking about the Rafah passage with Egypt, which Hamas has been trying to get the Egyptians to keep open. And this story just noted in passing, there's a passage from Gaza to Israel, the Erez passage, and that is the passage that Gazans use to get medical treatment in Israel. And it's been closed. And it's been closed not by Israel, which is willing to have Gazans continue to come into Israel for medical treatment. It's closed by Hamas. Closed by Hamas, so that if you need that medical treatment, you're in Gaza, you can't get out. So, I mean, people are, I think, clearly being used as human shields and human hostages. And the question, as you say, I think, is this is not going to be debated during the war. When the dust settles, does Hamas pay any price for this? Are Palestinians able to debate? Probably not able to debate this in Gaza, but on the internet in the West Bank, is there a good discussion of this now?
I mean, it's not. I think it's hard to dispute the fact that for Hamas, the more that civilian casualties mount, the more that they can extract a political price for it, the more that they can improve their bargaining position. And also, sadly, I would say, they can count on the Israelis to oblige. At the end of the day, this is a war and civilians will die. So we have this vicious dynamic as opposed to a virtuous one. And this is where, again, it is very important to work very closely with the Egyptians to ensure that a ceasefire happens. That's why, to me, this is the highest priority right now. And it's really up to the players on the ground to ultimately accept or not. And this is why I think, by the way, Hamas, by rejecting what the Egyptian offer yesterday, this is a major political blow to it. This is what's going to come back to haunt it more than anything else.
Thank you both for a fascinating conversation. I suspect we'll have more to talk about as the days pass, but I want to thank you both for being here and thank our audience for joining us today. Bye.